So last time we did a thing when we were doing our thing, and we had a poll, and it was a lot of fun. And so I'm going to do it again. And so while Susan is introducing herself,
Ah,
we're going to do this poll. The question is for those watching on Facebook. I have two monitors, so if I point that way, that's the Facebook people over there. For those watching on Facebook, drop your answer in the comments section, and you will see the results, and Susan will tell us the results after we're done. If you're on Zoom, should you have a little pop-up window in a second here. The question is, when was the last climate action plan for Delaware? All right, so I'm going to launch the poll. Susan, why don't you give us a little introduction about yourself and what you do?
well, hi, everybody. I'm very happy to be here with you today talking about what the state is doing for climate action, and more specifically, our climate action plan for Delaware. I am the administrator of the climate and sustainability team housed within the Division of Climate, Coastal, and Energy, which is housed in the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. So our role in the division, and more specifically in the climate and sustainability team, is to prepare Delaware for climate change by both minimizing greenhouse gas reductions and maximizing Delaware's resiliency to climate change. We also have a role in land use planning for the department and for the state, and that's where a lot of our sustainability practices come into play, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that term means maybe as we move forward. And as an offshoot of our programs for greenhouse gas reductions, our office has actually become sort of the center square in the state for clean transportation or clean vehicle programs, and for specifically electric vehicle implementation throughout the state. So we sort of found ourselves in that position, and I'm happy to hold that water and move the charge forward. So that's a little bit about me. I see that Patty Fisher has popped on, and a little fun fact about me is that a little over 10 years ago, I tried this thing called whitewater kayaking, and Patty Fisher is literally the reason that I'm here to tell the tale today, and has been a mentor and friend since then. And I get to see the world from a much different perspective in my whitewater kayak. So thrilled to see you here, Patty. It's great to see you. You get to see me in my working clothes instead of in my helmet. Yeah, I didn't even do that on purpose, Beth. I don't, it's just, it's amazing. All right, so I think everybody has taken the poll. And did you want me to go over it?
Yeah, so why don't you give everybody the answer there?
And there are prizes, right, for correct answers?
You get accolades. We all give you a round of applause.
So when was the last climate action plan for Delaware done? And the answers were in the year 2000, 1995, 2010, or never, with the most popular answer being never, and the second most popular answer being 2000. And the answer is, well, the answer is 2000 and never. So in the year, and also since then. So there's really no answer that's 100% correct. In the year 2000, there was a climate action plan that was conducted. It was led by the University of Delaware, and it was paid for by the Delaware Energy Office at the time, but it was really a University of Delaware product, not a state product, right? There was lots of state involvement in there, and it did a pretty good job for the time of looking at greenhouse gas emissions and where we could reduce emissions. And if you flip through that document, there's a heavy emphasis on the miracle of hybrid vehicles, right? In the year 2000, I think the Toyota Prius was like the it thing and the new technology. It also talked a lot about land use practices, a discussion that I know we continue, Peggy's nodding her head, a discussion we continue to have today and try to make progress on. So there are definitely some lessons to be learned even in that 20-year-old document. Since then, the state has done a lot of stuff for climate change, but we haven't ever revisited in a comprehensive way the greenhouse gas reduction strategy. So I am pretty happy to be able to work on that and also share that with you at some upcoming workshops. So which I'll get to. I'm jumping I had notes for myself. I just like blew through. I just screwed everything up and went.
That's the program for today. You covered everything. All right. So what is the issue that we're tackling with here in Delaware specifically?
So I think lots of you have heard me and others talk and read all the materials, right? Climate change is a huge issue for the state of Delaware. And it's caused by greenhouse gas emissions, of course, which are primarily caused by the combustion of fossil fuels, but also by other industrial pollutants, but primarily the combustion of fossil fuels and agriculture, less so in the state of Delaware. And it results,
agriculture?
Agriculture, yes.
How?
So, cow burps, primarily.
Burps.
Burp.
Not poop.
Farts, burps produce methane. This is less of a problem in the state of Delaware, or less of an emission source in the state of Delaware specifically, because we don't have a lot of dairy farms or even cattle. So it's a huge issue in places where animals are brought together in combined animal feeding lots, and they're producing an enormous amount. They're eating very quickly. They're producing enormous amount of emissions. So that's a big emission source in other states like California in particular, where there are a lot of these, and in the Midwest. Here we have chickens, and agriculture does. The chickens contribute a little bit, but mostly it's poultry litter that contributes, but it's a very, very small amount of our overall emissions. Something like, I don't have this one memorized, 2 or 3% of our emissions is coming from our agricultural sector. And that's agricultural practices, the way that we plow fields and manage nutrients, particularly from poultry. Whereas our transportation and industrial sectors are 30% of our emissions, right? So we focus a lot of our attention on the top 3 emitters, which is the electricity generation, transportation sector, and I said industrial, energy production, industrial, and transportation. So what all this means is worldwide, right, the planet is warming. And as the planet warms, that has different impacts in different places. Here in Delaware, we are faced with 3 primary impacts from the global changes that are happening. Sea level rise, which many of you have heard me talk about ad nauseum over the past decade. But in addition to sea level rise, we're looking at increased temperatures. So hotter hots, warmer nights, less cold winters, and longer growing seasons, which can be a benefit or not so much. If you love mosquitoes, that might be great for you. If you don't, maybe an extra long growing season is not such a benefit. And then the other impact that we're seeing and have experienced quite recently is extreme precipitation, right? And so the projections for the state of Delaware show that we should expect an increasing number of days where our precipitation falls in heavy downpours. So we may see overall a slight uptick in overall precipitation, but we're going to see that and experience that more and more as very heavy downpours. And why is that a problem? Well, the ground doesn't absorb the water as well when rain comes out of the sky in buckets. And so that's a problem because then our ground is drier. It also is a problem because our infrastructure and streams were not built for that kind of heavy downpour or on that routine kind of basis. And, you know, we've seen some very intense storms here in the state just recently with a state, as far as I understand, a state record for downpour intensity happening at Winterthur. That was the same week as Tropical Storm Isaias, but not in any way related to that particular tropical storm. It was one of these freak storms that pops up and did a tremendous amount of damage with something like 4 inches of rain at Winterthur within an hour. But I think they got half an inch in like 5 minutes or something. It was a tremendous, tremendous downpour. Was that caused by climate change? I don't know. I can't answer that. Scientists are increasingly working on science called attribution, so they can sort of look at the fingerprints of each storm and track that back to, you know, whether it was made more likely by climate change. But these events are made more likely by climate change because we're heating up, we're adding fuel basically to the fire. It makes these events much more likely because there's more energy for these storms to draw on because the planet is warmer.
So what are we doing right now, or what have we done thus far?
What are we doing? We're doing so many things. So I mentioned we're developing our climate action plan, but I want to jump back for a second. Even though we haven't had like an active climate action plan, the state has been doing quite a lot to reduce emissions. And in fact, has reduced emissions at least 18% between 2005 and 2018 overall. A lot of that has come from emissions reductions in the energy sector. So in the state of Delaware, our power plants switched over in the 2009-10 time period from coal to natural gas. And that has had a tremendous impact on reducing our emissions. We have also gotten more renewable energy deployed in the state through solar panels, and we're bumping up around 5% or so of our energy being derived in state from solar. We have focused a tremendous amount of effort and energy on energy efficiency, so making buildings more energy efficient so we're not using energy. And we've also focused on electrification of vehicles, in addition to lots of other strategies that we have deployed. But those are big ones that have been very meaningful and consequential. On the resiliency side, so resiliency or adaptation, which is a word that we use in the climate realm, adaptation is preparing for the impacts that are happening. Even if we stopped burning fossil fuels today, turned off that tap, we would continue to see impacts from climate change become more, I don't want to say worsen because that's the wrong verb, but we would continue to see them exacerbate over time because there's an awful lot of emissions already there and getting ready to do what they're going to do. So we know that there are impacts coming and we want to prepare for them. And so adaptation means, building for the future, doing what we can to make sure that our economy, our buildings, our transportation network is prepared for these changes that we know are coming in the form of sea level rise, increasing temperatures, and increased heavy rainfall events. And so there are meaningful ways that we can do this in land use practices, which we might talk a little bit more about, in the way that we build infrastructure. As an example, DelDOT is they have been a great partner in this, and they understand the risk to their roadway infrastructure. They're actively, building things better, looking at future conditions when they're looking at roads, and when they're building bridges, making sure that the new things that they're building are going to be built to last over a very long time period. Because when DelDOT builds a bridge, they have an 80-year lifespan, right? When they build something, they build it to last a whole human lifetime. And we know that conditions in 2100, wow, we finally are at the point where 80 years from now is 2100. In 2100, conditions are going to be much different. Sea levels are going to be 3 to 5 feet higher than they are today. temperatures are going to be higher, storms are going to be stormier, and they're building to make sure that those things can withstand those types of conditions. And so the state has been working very hard, specifically with state agency partners and local governments, to prepare for these impacts. And the reason that we focused on state agencies and local governments is really like most of the power for long-term planning and infrastructure development really lies at that level. The Department of Transportation controls 90% of the roads in the state. Local municipalities control where things are built and the building codes of how those things are built in the future. So they're really important. It's really important for us to make sure that local governments and state agencies who are really making all of these important decisions about our future have the right information, knowledge, and know-how to make good decisions. And so really for the past decade, since we worked for 3 years, and Peggy was a key part of that process to develop the sea level rise adaptation plan for the state, which is just, one part of the full story. And in doing so, we developed lots of data and products, and have been working with state agencies and local governments specifically on sea level rise since then in a very active way. And we've seen some good changes happen as a result of that.
So are we talking at all in the climate plan about things like, when we talk about sea level rise as an example, right? One thing that comes up is kind of almost like a controlled migration or controlled retreat or things about that. So we're talking about, working with local communities and municipalities. Is that part of the conversation for the climate action plan, is looking at in the future, how do we, one, build smarter and not build along a floodplain, but also how do we handle the developments and people that are already there?
So the climate action plan is going to have two major parts. One is how do we proceed with reducing emissions, and then how do we proceed in making the state more resilient. It's not written yet. So, there's a lot of opportunity to address these issues, and the upcoming workshops, we want to hear from people about that. But yes, this plan, I can guarantee you that this plan is not going to come in and say, the state is going to declare that Woodland Beach, you can't be there anymore and you're moving out. That is not what this plan is going to do. But what this plan might do is say, hey, we need to work together to come up to make sure that we have a consistent policy, that we have a consistent funding mechanism, or that we have a consistent way of making decisions with local governments about these thorny issues. Because all these decisions are local, right? And the decision about what's happening in Woodland Beach might be very different than the decision about what's happening in South Wilmington or at Long Neck in Sussex County, right? Each of these places are different. They have different challenges. They have different opportunities. They have different populations. They have different needs. And so that being able to make decisions about how to proceed, I think after this plan, I would like to see us be able to pinpoint some areas to do some much more in-depth resiliency planning, particularly with some of these entities that are not municipalities, but are within counties, like point to Woodland Beach, or it's not Long Neck, it's the other one. Maybe it is.
Let me ask you another question. So so right now the county is undergoing this comprehensive plan thing, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And one of the things about that is that when they're looking at development and growth and changes in the county, things have to kind of go along with the comprehensive plan. They have to be in line with the comprehensive plan. And you kind of hear that in any applicants and things like that come up at the county level. You'll see that line kind of like, almost like it's just like a thing they have to put in there, in line with the comprehensive plan, right? So, on the state level, on the state side, are we looking to do something similar with the climate action plan? Kind of like things have to kind of go in hand with this plan? Is that the hope that the state will kind of take that step?
So the climate plan is going to lay out the needs and the things that we need to do to be resilient and to reduce emissions. How we do that will be up to the decision makers in the state. And, you know, in order for, in other states, there's legislation that sets out a goal and provide some mandates about how, you know, how things should be built, or, you know, a set of criteria for state agencies to follow. Delaware does not yet have that. We had an executive order under the Markell administration, Executive Order 41, which mandated at the time that state agencies, you know, look at climate impacts and take that into consideration in their decision making. We worked on adaptation planning with state agencies through that executive order, and developed a flood avoidance manual, which is available online, de.gov/flood avoidance, that really sets out the steps that state agencies should take when looking at developing in flood prone areas. So it was all very sea level rise focused at the time, because that's where the emphasis was when we were doing planning. And so that has been implemented in a voluntary way. It is not a mandate. And we have had some great partners with the Office of Management and Budget and DelDOT. But so far and we've done some outreach and education, but that it still is a guidance. It is not a mandate. So that could be something that happens as the next step is having mandates, either an executive order or a legislative mandate to guide that information.
So you had mentioned a couple of key areas that the climate plan wants to look at, given that these three areas are our main emission sources. And I know you have a number of workshops coming up. So am I right in assuming that the workshops will kind of tackle different issues? Like if somebody had issues with transportation and say they, for example, didn't think DelDOT was really considering projected growth when they're creating roads and that sort of thing, would they want to go to like a transportation specific workshop? Can you tell us a little bit about those?
I would say if you have beef with DelDOT, you should definitely go to a DelDOT workshop. And I can direct you to many of those and help you find a way to complain to DelDOT specifically, no problem. So we have 5
email in the comments.
We have 5 climate action plan workshops coming up, and they are sort of sector specific. 2 of them will focus on greenhouse gas reductions, and it is the exact same workshop, and it will cover a wide variety of emission reductions and seek feedback from people. We have new information about greenhouse gas reduction potential of certain strategies that I'm really excited to share at these workshops. And so there's gonna be some interactive polling and some opportunity to engage with each other in breakout groups. Dustin showed me the first Zoom breakout group, and I was so amazed that we're using it in our workshops as well. And then, yay, Dustin, see, kudos to Dustin. And then after the 2 mitigation workshops are September 15th and September 17th. And you don't have to write this down because there's a website that's really easy to get to that I'll share with you in a second. And then we have 3 resiliency workshops that are each focused on a separate topic: sea level rise, increasing temperatures, and increased precipitation. So if you are somebody who's super interested in sea level rise, you should go to the sea level rise workshop and talk about strategies to deal with sea level rise. If you're somebody who's really concerned about maybe heat impacts and public health, go to the heat, spend your time at the heat workshop where you get to dive into those issues specifically. Is there overlap between all of them? Absolutely, right? But can you go to 4 of the 5 workshops and have a different and interesting experience? Yes. Just don't go to both mitigation workshops because you will be bored at the second one because it is exactly the same. And you can register for those workshops at declimateplan.org. And I'll even try to multitask. declimateplan.org. I just put it in the chat box there. Registration is free. You just you sign up for a ticket. It's a little bit weird. You sign up for a ticket. You can register for all 4/5 workshops right there all at once. So it's pretty easy.
So again, we talked about these kind of 3 sectors, right? So will the climate plan end up making kind of some policy recommendations on how to combat some of these issues? I know we've had, allies with other organizations or in other organizations that talk about things like emissions credits and penalties and all that sort of stuff. So the climate plan and recognizing kind of what some of the issues are that are contributing to these particular sectors of emissions, will they then in turn kind of make some policy recommendations, or are we looking more towards advocates to kind of continue fighting that fight without kind of that support of the plan, or how will that end up coming to a head?
So again, we haven't written the plan yet, but I envision there's going to be recommendations for moving forward, right? And in order to do that, or actions that we can take. And each one of those actions that will be outlined is sort of a reasonable next step to either reduce emissions or increase resiliency. Those might have legislative or regulatory or funding components tied up with them that would require some additional action, right? We're doing a lot with the resources that we have now, but it's clear that to go further, there needs to be some amount of legislation or regulation and dedicated funding to do some things. I just read an article in the paper the other day about a resiliency fund that was sort of an ad hoc resiliency fund that the governor is trying to set up for people who are suffering from the effects of Isaiah, their houses ripped apart. That has been pointed out over and over again as something that the state needs to consider because of the funding needs for resiliency projects, whether they be wetland restorations or bridge rehabs or community drainage projects. There will be an increased need over time for projects to adapt. And same too, so I'm very big into electric vehicles now, and we're doing a lot with electric vehicles, but we may need some additional policies or legislation to help smooth the path towards implementation. Even something as silly as signage is a problem, and it's actually a problem at the federal level. People have asked me why those blue signs that say McDonald's and gas on them don't also have an electric charging symbol, so that you know where the electric charging stations are. Well, that's because in federal law, federal law is a different nut entirely to crack. But in federal law, you're not allowed on those signs. You are only allowed to put, I think it's it's very well defined as gasoline or diesel, not fuel. So because electricity is a fuel that is not gasoline or diesel, you can't put an icon on the sign and direct people to a charging station, right? And so there are all these things that as you try to implement stuff at the state, you sort of you unpeel the onion and you come up with these barriers that you would have never envisioned. So sometimes they are small things that can be taken care of pretty easily, but then sometimes there's more that needs to be done than just a minor fix in legislative code. So what we're gonna do in the climate action plan is we're gonna point out the things that the state needs to start doing. And then we need to implement those things. And certainly to implement those things, we're either going to need to redirect resources or get new resources to do that work.
So, I mean,
I
know we have big issues, need big solutions, but everybody always wants to know, what are some of the things they can do at home in Delaware to kind of help with with climate change. And I feel like we talk about this sort of thing at all of our live streams, what can people do individually? And every speaker, I think, is kind of universally said, that they would rather answer the question of like, what do we need to do on that larger scale? But it's good sometimes to feel empowered about what you can do at home. So what would be your top 3 things you think you can do at home to kind of help us out here?
I'm going to make Peggy Schultz very happy right now. And I'm going to say, participate with your local governments. Let your local government participate in if you're in Newcastle, I know a lot of you are up here in Newcastle, participate in the Newcastle County Comprehensive Plan, because land use and land use decisions are made at the local level, and land use decisions are key for us meeting our greenhouse gas emissions reduction. Because if we continue to develop in the sprawling way that we have in this state, we will never get emissions under control from transportation or energy use, and be able to really benefit from the sequestration, the carbon storage that happens from trees, right? Which is also a pretty important component of our greenhouse gas story. So getting engaged with your local planning process, whether it's a transportation plan where you can advocate for bike paths and walking paths so that we can reduce our reliance on automobiles, whether it's the Southern Newcastle County Comprehensive Plan or the Newcastle Comprehensive Plan, or your city master plan, or even an ordinance that's being developed, or a development project to go and say, hey, here's a development project, not in my backyard sort of way, but in a I don't see sidewalks that connect between the neighborhoods. Why are you forcing people out into their car to just to go 100 feet, which happens all the time. So showing up and being a productive and common sense person can often make a huge difference in outcomes of on the ground development that are happening. And one person or 2 people who are persistent can make a huge difference in this realm. So I encourage you all to get to know and love your either your county council people or your municipal town council people, and help them make good decisions as we move forward, because that's a lot of things really hit the road there. Your local governments also make infrastructure choices. In addition to deciding where to build and how to build, they're deciding what to upgrade or what land to preserve, or whether to invest in electric vehicle charging stations at local parks, which Newcastle County is doing, which is great. So you can be very influential with some of those, and I think that's really, really helpful.
I'm going to take this opportunity to interrupt real quick. I'll let you continue if you want to add some more to that, but real quick. So tomorrow. Yeah. Tomorrow at 5 o'clock, the Sierra Club and a number of other organizations, we have a lot of partners on this one, are putting together, and we put together an event where you can directly ask questions from land use staff for Newcastle County, State Planning Department, University of Delaware, some individuals with some history in comprehensive planning, the head of the Route 9 Master Plan. They're all coming together to answer questions around comprehensive planning. What is comprehensive planning? What does the word comprehensive mean in this context? How can you interact with the comprehensive plan, or how does it interact with you? What all does it cover? Those kind of fundamental questions that we want to help empower not only each other, but also ourselves in being able to kind of participate in that process. So if you want to participate in it, but you don't feel comfortable because you don't feel like you have that kind of foundational knowledge, we invite you to come out and ask your questions tomorrow at 5 o'clock. It will be on Zoom. You can find it on website. You can find it on our Facebook page. It will be live streamed on Facebook. I can't guarantee that your questions will be answered from Facebook to Zoom like we're doing, try to do with these live streams. But if you RSVP to join the Zoom, everybody's going to have kind of an equal opportunity to ask questions tomorrow night, 5 to 6:30.
Great.
You can proceed if you have additional tips.
So I got, so I like to talk about levels of engagement. So I talked about the importance, we already talked about what the state is doing. We talked about the important role that local governments play in this. I'd like to talk really quickly about individual choices, but also the role of businesses, particularly large businesses, in driving some of the changes that we're seeing. Some of the large corporations have made sustainability commitments to reducing their carbon footprint, going net carbon zero by a certain date, really ramping up their usage of renewable energy. And some of these things are really driving the market. So FedEx has recently invested in, I think, don't quote me, I think it's FedEx. I think they have made a promise to invest in something like 10,000 or 100,000. I know there's a big difference between 10,000 and 100,000. I can't remember which one it is. Probably 10,000. Electric delivery vans. And that kind of commitment and investment then drives the innovation that then becomes, available to us at the consumer level, right? So those commitments are really important. So, if you work for a big company, or even if you have a little company, making sure that your company is being vocal about commitments and living those commitments is really important. And I mean, I'm seeing a lot of innovation that's being driven by some partnerships that are happening, particularly in the like electric trucking and delivery fields, and also renewable energy, right? It helps. These big things, these big commitments help these smaller companies move forward. And then, you can make individual choices. And I think that's a really important component. Individual choices will not solve our problem entirely, but they can, they can help make meaningful progress. They can help shape what businesses are doing, right? When consumers started buying more organic products, and guess what? You can find more organic products on the shelf in the grocery store now. There's Beyond Burgers in the actual meat section, right? So you can buy vegetarian burgers right next to the regular burgers in the grocery store. Blew my mind. These are really important changes that have been driven by consumer behavior and consumer willingness to maybe pay a little bit more for the more eco-conscious product. And so as you can, making those changes, if enough of us make those changes, then the products become more available for other people to then make a change. And, I've got friends who are not vegetarians who, are hardcore meat eaters who are buying Beyond Burgers every once in a while. And that can make a very meaningful change. And so just thinking about the levels and how you can support good decisions by local governments, by state government, by coming to a workshop, by the company that you work with or work for, and the consumer choices that you make. These are all important components of solving the global climate crisis.
Yeah, so this episode is brought to you by Beyond Burger.
I just had that experience, so it's in my mind.
Sorry, I couldn't help it.
I'm neutral to impossible / beyond. Sorry,
Oh, 100% beyond here. No. All right. So I appreciate the Beyond plug. No, I appreciate your time that you spent talking with us today. So for those that are watching on Zoom, this will also be up on our website with the links. The Delaware Climate Plan link will be on there, so you can RSVP for these workshops. Of course, Sierra Club encourages everybody to get out and participate in this. This is unlike any other project that we've we've done in the past, as Susan said as we started this conversation out. And just like the comprehensive plan, plug again, I encourage you to get involved, because if people don't engage on this or the comp plan, you know, these projects are driven by participation. So we really need that degree of citizen participation in order to really highlight the future that people want to see. And you know, we can't stress that enough in the climate plan and the comp plan, and in local and state government. So thank you very much, Susan. Thank you, everybody that's watching at home. We really appreciate it.
Thanks. Nope, no questions. Are we done? Did I use up all the time?
Question.
We are, we're actually a little bit over time, but if anybody on the Zoom has a question, a lot of the questions on Facebook, I think would probably be better for if we could get
Okay.
Garvin on the line. We could probably answer some of these other questions, but.
So do you want to, if you have questions and we can't stay, I'm happy to answer them on my email. I'll add my email address here. But let's do at least one. Can we do one? I think Patty wants to ask a question.
Just what's the latest data on the wetland replacement? We were moving wetlands, but we didn't have any data on whether or not the new wetlands were effective. That was the last I'd heard. And this is important in terms of land use and the increased precipitation we'll be getting.
So I don't have specific data on a specific wetlands project. There are many wetland restoration projects that have been done over time, and you know, some of them are successful and some of them are not successful, and in some cases it depends on how they were designed or whether they were maintained properly, and often when you're replacing a wetland, so let's say if a wetland is destroyed because of development or a roadway paving project, a wetland can be created in another place. But if a wetland is created in another place that doesn't have the same kind of soil or hydrology, it's often not as good as what was destroyed, right? And so that's why in a regulatory process, often if you have to, it's required, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers requires a replacement of wetlands that are destroyed in development. And so the replacement is usually like at least 2 to 1, because we know that recreated wetlands are good, but they're not as good as natural wetlands. So if you destroy an acre of wetlands or you pave over an acre of wetlands, you have to replace 2 acres. But there's no requirement that if sea level rise is inundating wetlands, you know, nobody is necessarily replacing those. And so we need to have a conversation, and we're collecting data about how wetlands move over time naturally, and whether the wetlands that we have in the state, the tidal wetlands, an expansive amount of tidal wetlands, whether they're actually keeping up with the pressures of climate change. And natural wetlands grow over time. All of the sediment, so, you know, the Delaware River is like kind of brown. And it's not because it's dirty, it's because it has a lot of sediment in it coming down from downstream. And that sediment filters out. I'm gonna do my little Hawaiian dance. The sediment filters out. When the wetlands flood, the sediment gets trapped, and then the soil in that wetland builds up over time, right? And so we're tracking that. And it's fascinating, right? How these things develop over time. There are wetlands in the state that right now are keeping up with the pace of sea level rise. So they're growing up, you know, millimeters per year and keeping up with the millimeters per year of sea level rise. So they're doing quite well in protecting us and protecting habitat and diversity. There are other wetlands that are not keeping up as well. And there are some reasons for that. I don't want to get in trouble by saying too much, but often wetlands that have been manipulated by humans over time don't keep up as well as wetlands that have been more left alone over time. And so there are wetlands who are accreting or growing that sediment, but they're not growing as fast as sea level rise is coming. And those are the wetlands that may be, you know, lost over time. There are ways that we can also interfere with that or improve it. And there are projects, particularly in the inland bays, where they're taking what we call dredge spoil, but they don't like to use that term anymore. So when you dredge out navigation channels, instead of putting that material in some, you know, on a farm field somewhere, they're now reusing that material to help wetlands grow over time, because it's clean material. And so they're spraying it on top of wetlands and helping, and that helps wetlands restoration. So there's 100 different kinds of wetland restoration types in the state, and lots of work going on with wetlands and preserving wetlands and making sure that wetlands are keeping up with the challenges of climate change. Ultimately, the way that Delaware's wetlands can keep pace will have to do with how fast sea levels rise over time. And as we move forward in time, the rate of sea level rise will increase. And at some point, if we continue to have global emissions in the way that we have, at some point, the rise in sea levels will exceed the wetlands' natural capacity to keep up. And at that point, we will see a lot, perhaps massive losses of our tidal wetlands in the state, right? But the department is pretty cognizant of that and working to collect data and make good management decisions in how to handle that. So that's just, you know, one of many issues that we're dealing with.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Fascinating. It is.
Another question. Maybe I beat around the bush too much around this. I thought I had asked it, but so is DNREC or the governor going to introduce any legislation in the upcoming session based on recommendations included in the climate action plan?
I don't know. You could ask the governor and legislators that, right? We haven't written the plan. And so we don't know what legislation might be needed to support the actions in the plan, right? And so certainly nobody has made a commitment to introduce legislation. I believe, though, that you will likely see the renewable legislation come back, because there was not time to act on that last session. So I'm pretty sure that's going to come back. Although Senator McDowell retired, so I'm not sure who might like hold the torch this time for introducing that legislation. But beyond that, I do not know yet, because we don't know the outcome of the plan and what things might be needed. But that's a great question. And we'll find out when we release the plan. The plan is now going to come out winter 2021. Well, what does that mean, Susan? It means after January and before March 21st, and as soon as possible, right? We do want to get the plan out, and had originally planned to have it out by December, which was a pretty aggressive and ambitious timeline. We're going to take some extra time to make sure that it's right, and hopefully get it out January, February time period. So that if there is a significant legislative need, that the governor or legislators have that information and can utilize it to get something done this session, should they choose to do that.
Great, which is why you need to get engaged. Not you, you're already engaged. Everybody else, that's why you need to get engaged in developing this plan. Peggy did have a question earlier on about sea level rise, looking for a comment, I believe, on the issue that planning locally is kind of complicated because floodplains are based on FEMA data, which does not include sea level rise. So do you have any comments on that?
I do, and it's complicated, right? And so the city of Lewis right now is actively struggling with this issue, because they are looking to have a resiliency ordinance. And they are the first local government that I'm aware of that is trying to figure out if they can create a zone where you have to do better. And they know that the 100-year floodplain is not, it's not good enough, because we know that within 30 years of a mortgage that floodplain is going to expand, because we're looking at sea level rise, we're looking at more heavy precipitation. That line gets redrawn every 5 to 10 years when FEMA does their studies. So you might expect that over time, your floodplain line is going to get wider and wider and wider. And so Lewis is trying to prepare for that and make good decisions. And you know, they're struggling with how you do that and how you do it legally and defensively. And it's difficult. Not a lot of local governments have gotten there yet. But I'm really glad that Lewis is. That's going to come out wrong. I'm really glad that Lewis is struggling with this. I'm not glad they're struggling, but I'm glad that they're tackling the problem and trying to figure out. And if they can figure it out and we can help them figure it out, it might be a model then for other local governments to take up. And so it's tricky, because you have to craft an ordinance that is legally defensible, and that makes sense and it works for a lot of different scenarios. And you know, it turns out it's not that easy. And so, you know, I'm really proud of them for taking it on and trying to make that happen. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully there will be something.
Peggy's recommendation, which I think some of our viewers would agree with, is just forbidding development in the coastal zone. I think.
Well, so, you know, talk to the governor about that. I'm pretty sure that Governor Carney would disagree with that particular sentiment. But there's also, you know, there's a way that you can do development in risky areas, and we already have a lot of development in areas at risk, right? And so some of that will need to be rehabbed or redone over time. The coastal zone itself also doesn't capture all of the places that are at risk, right? So the coastal zone, particularly in so let's talk, I don't know why this came to mind, but the coastal zone in Kent County, it really is a limit at either Route 1 or Route 9. But there are places like in Frederica along the Murder Kill River that are very susceptible to flooding and sea level rise. So even the Coastal Zone Act area doesn't even capture all of the potential increased flooding risk. And that's not to talk about places along the Christina River or tidal rivers like the Red Clay or the White Clay River that flooded big time recently with the big rains, right? And so the people up there from increasing precipitation are also at risk. But what Peggy points out is that the state has, you know, in general, local governments are, oh my goodness, my mother is at Patty Fisher's house with her mask on. That's my mother in the pink, everybody. This is being filmed live. This is great. This is excellent.
Well, Facebook won't see her, so it's okay.
I should have told her I was doing a thing. The Coastal Zone Act is an example where the state actually, I don't want to say the state usurped the local zoning authority, but it kind of did. The state made a decision and said, hey, in this area, you're not allowed to do this thing. And so that's one example that shows that states can, if local governments don't have the ability to do the necessary zoning, that state governments can come in and do that. And there are similar examples in a way in New Jersey and Maryland, where they have designated a certain areas where there's much stronger restrictions, and those are at a statewide level. So that's definitely something to think about moving forward, that the state does have this very successful example in the coastal zone of how the state can do some sort of zoning statewide.
All right, now we really do have to sign off.
Sorry, I could talk for another 6 hours, so let me come back.
Yeah, you can come back. We can come to the workshops. We'll keep the conversation going.
Hi, Mom. Yes, please come to the workshops. Visit declimateplan.org, declimateplan.org to sign up, and I'll see you in September.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
It's such a pleasure to see you and talk to you about these issues.